Chapter 1: The Song of Dust and Shadow. When a sandbag falls from the rafters, narrowly missing the new lead actress, the crew calls it an accident. But when the old props bleed fresh blood and a phantom's song echoes from an empty dressing room, Detective Aris must ask, is this a jealous rival, or has the ghost of the lost soprano truly returned for her final bow? The question settled on Detective Aris Thorne with the same weight as the November fog that clung to the grand, decaying facade of the Lyceum Opera House. The building was a monument to a forgotten era, its baroque angels weeping streaks of black grime, its tall windows boarded up like blind eyes. It had stood silent for 20 years, a hollow tomb of velvet and gilt, until this new, ambitious production had dared to wake it. Aris was not a man for the dramatic. He was a man of quiet observation, of patient silences. He preferred the scent of old books and weak tea to the sharp cordite of a crime scene, which was, perhaps, why the precinct had sent him. This was not a matter for sirens and forensics, not yet. This was a matter of atmosphere. He pushed open the heavy oak stage door, the hinges groaning a low, mournful baritone. The air that met him was not the air of a living theater. It was the scent of a crypt. It smelled of dust, of damp plaster, of mice, and of something else, a faint, lingering perfume of decay and old, dried flowers. He stepped into the backstage gloom. The only light came from a single, bare bulb, the ghost light that cast a weak, lonely circle on the vast, scarred wooden stage. High above, in the darkness of the fly tower, a complex web of ropes and pulleys ascended into an abyss, like the rigging of a lost ship. Detective Thorne, the voice was strained, too loud in the oppressive quiet. A young man in a rumpled tweed jacket emerged from the shadows. He was wringing his hands. This was Julian Vance, the director, a man with a vision, Aris had been told. A man, it now seemed, on the verge of losing his nerve. "Mr. Vance," Aris said, his own voice a low murmur, seeming to be absorbed instantly by the surrounding darkness. He did not offer a hand. He simply nodded, his gaze already moving, scanning, absorbing. "Thank you for coming. I know it seems like an overreaction," Vance hurried on, gesturing to the stage. "The police, they said it was just an accident. Old rigging, this place, it's falling apart." Aris walked past him onto the stage. His footsteps echoed in the vast, empty auditorium beyond, a cavern of darkness where thousands of velvet-covered seats waited like patient shadows. He looked up, his eyes tracing the path of the fallen sandbag. It had left a cloud of dust on its journey from the grid. He crouched, examining the impact point. The stage planks were splintered, a fresh, pale scar in the dark, old wood. "She was standing here," Vance whispered, pointing. "Isla, our lead. Rehearsing the aria of sorrows. She stepped back to take a breath, and he gestured at the splintered wood, 2 feet to the left and she would be gone." "Who controls the rigging?" Aris asked. His voice was soft, methodical. "Milo, our stage manager, but he's been here for 50 years. He was here as a boy before she vanished. He's meticulous. He swears the line was sound. He says it didn't want her singing that song." Aris repeated, the word hanging in the cold air. "La Fantasma," Vance said, his voice dropping. "Ilara Rouser, the soprano who vanished. 1923, mid-performance, this opera, the same one we're trying to stage. She walked off stage for her change into dressing room 7 and was never seen again. They say her voice, you can still hear it, when the theater is empty." Aris stood, brushing dust from his trousers. He was not a superstitious man. He was a man who believed in patterns. A falling sandbag was gravity. A frightened crew was human nature. But a legend was a place to hide things. Where is the actress now? In her dressing room, she's shaken, but she's defiant. She wants to continue, but the crew, they're terrified, they're threatening to walk. And the stage manager, Milo, in the prop room, I think, down below. Checking inventory, he's been muttering ever since it happened. Aris nodded. "I will speak with them, but first I would like to see the flies, and then I would like to see dressing room 7. Vance looked visibly paler. "Dressing room 7, but it's been sealed for decades. No one goes in there. It's hers." "Which is precisely why I must," Aris said, his tone gentle but absolute. The next hour was a slow descent into the theater's memory. Aris moved with a patient, unhurried rhythm, perfectly suited to the building's own slow decay. He climbed the narrow, vibrating metal catwalks high above the stage. The air was thin and cold. The grid was a forest of ropes, counterweights, and sandbags, identical to the one that had fallen. He examined the pin rail where the rope had been secured. The knot was correct. The rope itself was old, yes, but not frayed. It looked clean. Too clean, as if it had been deliberately loosened. He found no cutting tool, no obvious sign of sabotage, just a feeling, a deep, unsettling wrongness. The rope had not slipped. It had been permitted to fall. He descended, his footsteps the only sound, a slow, metallic beat in the darkness. He made his way to the dressing room corridor. It was a long, narrow tunnel, lined with doors, each with a tarnished brass star. The air here was thicker, heavy with the scent of old makeup and stale perfume. He passed dressing room 5, dressing room 6, and then, at the end of the hall, dressing room 7. The door was different. It was darker wood and the brass star was gone, leaving only a faint, discolored outline. A heavy, rusted padlock was looped through the handle, but it wasn't locked. It was just hanging. "Milo keeps the key," Vance whispered, who had been following Aris at a distance. He says he locked it." Aris pushed the door. The hinges did not groan. They whispered, a dry, papery sound, as if the wood itself had turned to dust. The room was not empty. It was a shrine. It was preserved as if in amber. The air was suffocatingly still. A layer of gray, undisturbed dust covered everything. A silver-backed hairbrush lay on the vanity next to a crystal jar of dried-up rouge. A single withered rose, now black as char, lay beside it. A beautiful pale blue silk gown, the costume for the aria of sorrows, hung from a wooden form in the corner. It looked spectral in the dim light. "This is..." Just as she left it, Vance breathed, awestruck. Aris said nothing. He walked to the vanity. The mirror was clouded, as if a breath had fogged it, but the fog did not clear. He looked at the dust on the floor. It was thick, undisturbed, except for one clear set of footprints. Small, narrow like a woman's heeled boot. They led from the doorway and stopped right in the middle of the room. They did not lead to the wardrobe. They did not lead to the vanity. They did not lead back to the door. They simply stopped, as if the person who made them had vanished into the air. Aris knelt, examining the prints. They were fresh. The dust was pressed down, not scattered. "Someone was in here," he murmured. "But who and how did they?" Aris's gaze traveled from the footprints up the wall. His eyes scanned the peeling, water-stained wallpaper. It was a pattern of faded roses, and behind the wooden dress form he saw it. A faint vertical line in the wallpaper, a seam that did not match the pattern. A secret passage. The legend was true. Ilara Rouse had not vanished. She had walked into the wall. He pushed the dress form aside. The silk of the gown brushed his hand, cold and dry. He ran his fingers along the seam. A small, hidden latch clicked under his thumb. A section of the wall, no wider than a man's shoulders, swung inward, revealing a pitch-black, narrow space. The air that exhaled from it was colder. It smelled of damp earth, of stone, and of the river that ran beneath the city. "My God," Vance whispered. "A bolt hole." "Or a tomb," Aris replied, his voice flat. He shone his small pocket torch into the darkness. It was a narrow, brick-lined passage. It sloped down. "We should call the police." "The real police," Vance stammered. "Not yet," Aris said. "A passage is just architecture. It is not by itself a crime." He closed the panel, the click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud. "Let us find your stage manager. Let us find Milo. He has, I think, been a very poor guardian of this room." They descended into the bowels of the theater, into the cavernous workshops and prop rooms that lay beneath the stage. This area was a labyrinth of forgotten productions. Stacks of scenery painted with distant landscapes. Racks of costumes, shedding sequins and feathers. A bestiary of plaster statues and papier-mâché monsters. The air grew colder. The smell of damp was stronger here. "Milo," Vance called out. His voice was swallowed by the clutter. They found him in the deepest, most remote room. The archive, a vast, warehouse-like space where the oldest props were kept. Milo was an old man, thin as a rail, with a face like crumpled parchment. He was sitting on a wooden crate, his head in his hands. "Milo," Vance said, his voice sharp with accusation. "Someone was in her dressing room. The lock." Milo looked up, his eyes wide and terrified. I know I locked it. I always keep it locked. But this morning, after the sandbag, I went to check. The lock was hanging just as you saw it." "Who else has a key?" Aris asked, his voice a calm counterpoint to Vance's agitation. No one, Milo whispered. Only me and her. He was trembling. She doesn't want us here, sir. She doesn't want her singing her songs. He pointed a shaky finger at Vance. I told him to leave her in peace. Ilara Rousseau is dead, Milo, Aris said, not unkindly. She cannot harm anyone. Can't she? Milo shot back, a strange fire in his eyes. Then you tell me, detective, you tell me how that is possible. He pointed not at a person, but at an object. In the center of the room sat a large leather-bound trunk, its lid thrown open. It was marked with the original production's insignia, La Cenerentola 1923. Aris moved toward it. It was filled with props from the opera's final act, a glass slipper, a velvet pillow, and a prop dagger, the one used in the tragic finale. It was an ornate theatrical weapon, its blade painted a dull silver, but it was not dull now. From the hilt, a thick, dark, viscous liquid was pooling. It dripped slow and rhythmic onto a white silk wedding veil beneath it. A drip, drip, drip. That was the only sound in the vast, cold room. Aris leaned closer. It was not paint, it was not oil. He touched a finger to the edge of the puddle. He brought it to his nose. The coppery, unmistakable scent of iron and salt filled his senses. The prop was bleeding, and the blood was fresh. Chapter 2: The Withered Rose. The drip, drip, drip of the blood was the only sound. It was a terrible, patient metronome, marking time in the vast, cold archive. Milo was breathing in short, shallow gasps, his eyes fixed on the dark pool gathering on the white silk. Julian Vance, the director, looked ill, his face the color of wet plaster. Detective Aris Thorne, however, remained still. He observed the scene with a profound, cold calm. He was not looking at the blood, he was looking above it. His eyes traced a line from the open trunk, upward, past the towering shelves of forgotten props, to the low, vaulted ceiling. The ceiling was stone, part of the theater's ancient foundation. He saw a fine, dark crack in the mortar, and from it, the faint, dark residue of moisture. The dagger was not bleeding. It was, he realized, collecting. The blood was coming from somewhere. Above, this archive was in the sub-basement. Above this was the stage level. And above that, he looked back at Vance. Where is this room in relation to the rest of the theater? We are directly beneath the main dressing room corridor, Vance said, his voice trembling. Below her room. Aris nodded slowly. The geography of the crime was beginning to form in his mind. The blood was a signpost, pointing not to the past, but to a very present, very real tragedy. Mr. Vance, Aris said, his voice a quiet command, go to the green room, fetch your lead actress, Miss Isla, and her understudy. I will speak with them there. Milo, you will not touch this. You will lock this room and you will wait for me by the stage door. Lock it, Milo stammered. With that. You are not locking it in, Aris said, his voice flat. You are locking us out, to preserve the scene. Go. The two men scrambled away, their footsteps echoing, desperate to leave the cold and the dark. Aris remained alone for a long moment. He knelt by the trunk. The blood was real, human, recent. This was not a haunting. This was a murder theatrically staged. The killer had not only committed a terrible act, but had used the theater's own legend as the script. The blood was not a warning, it was a proclamation. I am here, and I am real. He made his way back up the narrow stone stairs, his footsteps muffled by the thick, settled dust. He emerged into the backstage area, where the single ghost light kept the deepest shadows at bay. He walked to the green room. It was a small, sad space, its mirrors clouded with age, its green velvet sofas faded and torn. A single, buzzing fluorescent light flickered overhead. Julian Vance was there, packing. Two women sat on one of the sofas, a study in contrasts. The first was Isla, the lead. She was young, with pale, luminous skin and wide, frightened eyes. She was wrapped in a heavy wool coat, but Aris could see she was still trembling from her near miss with the sandbag. The second was Serafina, the understudy. She was darker, her black hair pulled back in a severe bun, her posture rigid with a coiled, impatient anger. She watched Aris, her eyes sharp and assessing. Miss Isla, Aris began, his voice soft. He did not sit. He stood by the door, a quiet silhouette. You were the one on stage. Yes, she said, her voice a surprisingly strong, clear soprano, though it wavered. I was running the aria. I stepped back, and the sandbag fell, Aris finished. Had anything else happened before today? Isla hesitated. She glanced at Serafina, who was studying her own fingernails with pointed indifference. All things, Isla said, her voice dropping. My sheet music, missing my costume, the new blue dress. I found a small tear in the seam. I thought it was just accidents, this old place. And this morning, Aris prompted. At your vanity, Isla's eyes widened. How did you know? I did not, Aris said. Tell me. I found a rose, a dead one like the one in her room, in Alara's room. It was just sitting on my mirror. No one knew how it got there. Milo, Serafina scoffed, her voice a low, gravelly contralto. He's the one. He's always leaving his offerings. He's obsessed with the ghost. He thinks she gestured at Isla, is a blasphemy. Miss Serafina, Aris said, turning his calm gaze to her. You are the understudy. Among other things, she said, not meeting his eye, I'm the assistant choreographer, the vocal coach, the one who actually knows this opera. I should have had the part. The jealousy was not a subtext, it was a declaration. You know the theater well. A small, mirthless smile touched Serafina's lips. I grew up in these shadows. My grandfather was a set designer here back in the 20s. He knew Alara. Here, the night she vanished. And he told you stories, Aris stated. He told me this building wasn't built right. He said it was a house of tricks. Mirrors, hidden spaces. He said Alara was a difficult woman. Talented, yes, but cruel. She had admirers, dangerous ones. And you, Aris asked, do you believe in La Fantasma? Serafina stood up, her energy too large for the small, decaying room. I believe in ambition, detective. I believe in rage. I believe in men who get away with things. And I believe, she said, her voice dropping, that this production is cursed, not by a ghost, but by incompetence. Vance here is cutting corners. The rigging is old. The crew is lazy. It's a miracle no one's been killed before today. Her words hung in the air, a perfect, rational explanation, and a perfect, calculated alibi. You said, before today, Aris noted. Serafina's expression flickered, a figure of speech. Detective, Isla interrupted, her voice small. What did you find in the archive? Vance said. He said you found something. Aris looked at her pale, terrified face. The new Alara. We found a complication, Aris said. Mr. Vance, please see these ladies to their cars. I want no one else in the building, only Milo and myself. This theater is now closed. But the production, Vance protested. The production, Aris said, is paused indefinitely. He left them, the fluorescence of the green room buzzing behind him. He walked back into the vast, dark silence of the stage, the ghost light, the echoes, the cold. He had the players, the frightened ingenue, the jealous rival, the obsessed old man. He had the method, the loosened rope, the secret passage. He had the message, the bleeding dagger. He stood at the bottom of the corridor, looking at the door to dressing room 7. It was closed just as he had left it. The air was heavy, still, and smelled of dust. He was alone. The theater was empty, he was sure of it. The silence was absolute. And then from behind the sealed, locked door of Alara Rousseau's dressing room, he heard it. It was not a creak. It was not the wind. It was a voice. A woman's voice singing. A clear, impossibly pure, and achingly sad sound. It was not a song he recognized, but a simple, descending scale, a vocal warm-up. It was not Isla. It was not Serafina. The voice was older, richer, and filled with a melancholy that made the cold air in the corridor seem to suddenly drop another 10 degrees. He stood frozen, listening as the voice hummed for a few moments, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that rushed back in was heavier and more terrible than before. Chapter 3: The Bones of the Lyceum. Detective Aris Thorne did not move. He was a statue of patience, his entire being focused on the thick, wooden door of dressing room 7. The last, ethereal note of the song seemed to hang in the air, a visible frost, before dissolving into the profound, dusty silence. He was a rational man. He did not believe in ghosts. He believed in acoustics, in tricks, in the human capacity for illusion, especially in a place built for it. He did not call out. He did not panic. He reached into his pocket and his fingers closed around the heavy, cold brass of the master key Milo had given him. He slid the key into the hanging, rusted padlock. It turned with a stiff, grinding scrape. He removed the lock. He put his hand on the doorknob, turned it, and pushed. The door swung open, whispering over the dusty floor. The room was exactly as he had left it. The air was still. The dust on the floor, where the footprints had stopped, was undisturbed. The dress form stood sentinel in the corner. The vanity was untouched. The clouded mirror reflected nothing but his own dark shape in the doorway. The room was empty, but the song had come from here. He stepped inside, his pocket torch cutting a sharp, white circle in the gloom. He walked to the back wall, to the hidden panel. He pressed the latch. The seam in the wallpaper opened, the small door swinging inward with a faint, dry thud. The cold, dark air of the passage exhaled, smelling of river silt and stone. The song had come from in here. The passage was a perfect resonance chamber, a stone throat that had amplified the sound and thrown it into the sealed room. Someone was inside the walls. He stepped into the blackness. The passage was narrow, the brickwork cold and damp to the touch. He was forced to turn his shoulders to fit. The torch beam lit only a few feet ahead. The dust on the floor here was thick, but it was not undisturbed. He saw the footprints, the same small, narrow prints from the dressing room. They led down. He followed. The passage became a tight, descending spiral staircase, the stone steps worn smooth in the center. The air grew colder, heavier. The smell of the river intensified. He could hear a faint, rhythmic drip, drip, drip. It was not blood. It was water seeping through the ancient foundations. He moved slowly, his soft-soled shoes making almost no sound. He was a shadow following a ghost. The staircase ended. He was in a low, vaulted tunnel. He could stand, but the ceiling was only inches above his head. The footprints continued, clear in the damp silt. He was now deep beneath the theater, in the foundations that predated the building itself. This was part of the old city, a forgotten waterway or sewer, co-opted by the theater's builders. The tunnel opened suddenly into a larger space. He shone his torch around. It was a vast circular chamber domed like a cistern. In the center, half submerged in dark, oily water, was the colossal, rusted iron machinery of the theater's original hydraulic stage lift, abandoned decades ago. The air was thick, wet, and utterly still. The footprints, they led to the edge of the dark water and stopped, as if the person had walked into it. Aris shone his light across the surface. Nothing. Just a faint, oily sheen. No, he murmured to himself. Illusion. He was being led, distracted. He looked around the chamber again. The footprints had stopped, yes. But there, on the far side of the chamber, just at the edge of his torch beam, was another passage, a dark, rectangular opening. He had to circle the perimeter of the chamber, his hand brushing the curved, weeping brickwork. He reached the other side. This passage was different. It was drier, it smelled of dust and something else. The faint, cloying scent of stale perfume. He followed it. It sloped upward. He was ascending again. He walked for what felt like an eternity, the silence broken only by his own steady breathing. The passage straightened, widened. He saw a faint light ahead. He emerged not into a room but onto a narrow, railed platform. He shone his torch down. He was in darkness, but it was a familiar, vast darkness. He was in the auditorium high above the seats. He was in the old, sealed-off founder's box, a private viewing room hidden behind a plaster grille, level with the grand circle. It afforded a perfect, secret, and unseen view of the entire stage. The ghost could watch every rehearsal. The box was not empty. A single, elegant, high-backed chair sat facing the stage. On a small table beside it, there was a crystal wine glass and a fresh, white gardenia floating in a small bowl of water. Someone had been here, recently, and they had left him a clear, arrogant message. I see everything. Aris stood, absorbing the implications. The killer had total, unrestricted access to the entire building, moving through its hidden arteries like blood in a vein. The killer could be anywhere, in the walls, above the stage, below the seats. The killer was the theater. He looked back at the passage. He had to go back to the spiral staircase. The blood in the archive. He had determined it came from above, from the dressing room corridor. He had been distracted by the song, by the passage. He had followed the performer when he should have been following the blood. He retraced his steps, down from the box, back into the tunnel, back to the circular cistern, back up the spiral staircase. The climb was arduous, his breathing echoing in the tight space. He emerged back into Ilara's dressing room. He closed the panel, click. He stepped into the corridor. He looked at the floor. The corridor was carpeted, a faded, threadbare runner. He shone his torch along the base of the wall, and there, just outside dressing room 7, he saw it. A dark, faint stain on the carpet, almost invisible in the gloom. It was directly above the spot where the prop trunk sat in the archive. 2 floors below, he knelt. The carpet was damp. He followed the stain. It was not a pool, it was a trail, a series of small, dark drips. They led away from Ilara's room, past dressing room 6, past dressing room 5. They led to the door of dressing room 4. This door was not locked. It was slightly ajar. Aris pushed it open. The room was dark. He found the light switch. A bare bulb flickered on. The room was a mess. Unlike Ilara's shrine, this was a working room filled with racks of costumes, bolts of fabric, sketches pinned to the wall. It was the costumer's workshop. and slumped against a cutting table, his eyes wide and vacant, was a man in a tweed waistcoat. A tape measure was still draped around his neck. Aris recognized him, Marco, the head costumer, the man who had been repairing Isla's dress. He had been dead for hours. A single, precise puncture wound was in the center of his chest. His blood had pooled, seeped through the floorboards, dripped 2 stories down and landed on the prop dagger. The ghost's fresh blood was Marco's. Aris looked at the man's hand. He was clutching something. Aris gently pried the cold, stiff fingers open. Resting in the man's palm was a small, tarnished brass object. It was the star, the missing star from the door of dressing room 7. As Aris stood, absorbing this, he heard a sound. It was not a song, it was not a drip, it was a creak, a heavy, deliberate footstep. On the main stage, just beyond the corridor, someone else was still in the theater. Chapter 4: The Understudy's Shadow. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. A single, heavy creak of an old floorboard settling under a deliberate weight. It had come from the main stage, the vast, dark expanse just beyond the dressing room corridor. Detective Aris Thorne did not call out. He extinguished his pocket torch, plunging the narrow corridor into near-total blackness, save for the faint, grey rectangle of the doorway at the far end. He moved with a practiced, liquid silence, his feet finding the clear path on the threadbare runner, avoiding the bloodstain. He reached the end of the corridor and peered out. The stage was a sea of shadows. The single, stark ghost light in the center did not illuminate. It merely created a small, pale island of visibility, leaving the wings and the cavernous auditorium beyond in an abyss of gloom. The sound had come from stage left. He stepped from the corridor, his presence absorbed by the immense, cold void of the theater. The smell of dust and decay was stronger here, mixed with the scent of old paint and canvas from the stacked scenery in the wings. "Who is there?" His voice was not a shout, but a low, resonant query designed to carry. A shadow detached itself from a larger shadow. From behind a stack of flats painted to look like a moonlit forest, Serafina, the understudy, stepped into the edge of the ghost light's circle. She was not dressed in her coat. She was in her black rehearsal clothes. She was not frightened, she looked expectant. "I told you to leave the theater, Miss Serafina," Aris said. He did not move closer. He maintained the distance, a silent chessboard between them. "I forgot my score," she said, her voice a low, defiant purr. She held up a leather-bound book of music. "I came back. The stage door was unlocked. I heard it too, detective." "Heard what?" "The song," she breathed, a small theatrical smile playing on her lips. "La Fantasma, she sings for me sometimes. When I'm alone, she knows I respect her." "She sang from dressing room 7, Aris stated. "No," Serafina corrected, stepping further into the light. Her dark eyes were intense. "She sang from everywhere, from the dome, from the walls. You think she is trapped in that one little room? She is the building." Aris watched her. She was a consummate performer. Every word, every gesture was for effect. "You were not frightened," Aris observed. "You heard a disembodied voice in an empty theater and you walked toward it." "It's not empty, detective," she whispered. "And I told you I grew up here. The sounds of this place, they're like a second language to me. Why are you still here? Did you find something?" Aris took a slow step toward her. "I found Marco, the costumer." The smile on her face did not falter, but her eyes hardened. "Did he? Poor Marco, he was always clumsy, fumbling with the silks. He was murdered, Miss Serafina, stabbed in his workshop, sometime in the last few hours." Her composure cracked. It was a fractional, almost invisible tremor, but Aris saw it. A tightening of the jaw, a flicker of her eyelids. "Murdered," she repeated. It was not a question. It was a new fact being slotted into an equation. "You were the last one I spoke to," Aris said, his voice remaining a low, soft monotone. "Where did you go after you left the green room?" "To my dressing room, downstairs. I gathered my things. I realized I'd left my score in the orchestra pit. I came back, the building was silent. And you saw no one." "Only her shadow," Serafina said, regaining her balance. "Only the feeling of her. She is angry, detective. Marco, he was altering her dress. The blue one, he was copying it. For Isla, a sacrilege, the ghost. She would not permit that. She was offering him a narrative, a neat, supernatural solution." Aris walked past her, his gaze sweeping the stage. He looked up into the black void of the fly tower. "The sandbag, Miss Serafina, a very practical piece of stagecraft, not spectral. An accident," she insisted. "No," Aris said. "A warning to Isla to stay away. What if the ghost?" is not Ilara? What if it is someone who loves Ilara, someone who sees this new production as a betrayal, someone like your grandfather? Serafina went rigid. My grandfather is dead, but his stories are not, Aris said, turning to face her. You said he was a set designer, that he was obsessed with her, that she had dangerous admirers. Was he one of them? She laughed, a short, harsh sound that was absorbed by the velvet of the auditorium. My grandfather, he was a worker, a craftsman. He adored her, yes, from a distance, as did everyone, but she broke him. She broke this theater. When she vanished, the production collapsed. The theater closed. He lost everything, his job, his mind. He died in an asylum, sketching her face on the walls. The motive was no longer inherited vengeance. It was personal. Serafina was not just an understudy, she was the heir to a ruin. He taught you everything, didn't he? Aris said softly. The acoustics, the passages, the tricks of the house. He looked down at her dark rehearsal clothes. He saw on the knee a faint smudge of pale grey, the same color as the thick, settled dust in the hidden passages. You were in the walls, Miss Serafina. You were the one I heard. You were in the founder's box. You left the gardenia. Her eyes widened. He had overplayed. He had revealed his hand. She took a step back, her performer's mask crumbling into genuine fear. I don't know what you're talking about. I do know the passages. Yes, my grandfather showed them to me as a child. A game. I've used them to frighten Isla, to move her music. A dead rose, a little theatricality to make her lose her nerve, so I could have the part. Yes, but murder, a sandbag. No, I would never. I respect this stage. And Marco, Aris pressed, taking a step toward her. Did you respect him? Marco, I haven't seen him since this morning. He found the star, the brass star from Ilara's door. He was always finding things, old buttons, old scraps. He was like a magpie. He was going to sell it to a collector. He told you this. He told everyone, she spat. He was a fool, and he was clutching it when he died, Aris said. Serafina's face went white. As she opened her mouth to speak, the song began again. It was not the soft, mournful scale from the dressing room. It was a full, clear, powerful note. An A-sharp ringing with such purity and volume that it seemed to make the dust on the stage floor vibrate. It came from high above, from the central dome, amplified by the theater's perfect, cavernous acoustics. It was a sound of profound, inhuman sorrow. It held for 5, 10, 15 seconds. And then it cut to absolute silence. Serafina was trembling, her hand to her mouth. Her eyes wide with terror, staring up into the darkness. It wasn't me, she whispered. I can't do that. That was her. Aris looked up as well, his gaze cold, analytical. The song had not been a warning. It had not been a distraction. It had been, he realized, a summons, a signal. Someone was calling the ghost. Chapter 5. The words of the stage manager. The echoes of the high, clear note faded, leaving a silence that felt heavier, more profound than before. The vast, dark auditorium seemed to have inhaled and was now holding its breath. Serafina was paralyzed, her face pale, her eyes still fixed on the darkness of the dome. Her story, her practiced lies and half-truths had been shattered by a sound she could not explain. It wasn't me, she whispered again, her voice shaking. I swear it wasn't me. I believe you, Aris said, his voice a low, cold anchor in the dark. That was not a human voice. It was a recording. He was a man of logic. A ghost was an impossibility. Phonograph and amplifier hidden in the ventilation system, placed in the theater's acoustic sweet spot. That was a mechanism, that was a plan. A recording, the sound of Ilara Rauso, Aris said, his mind working, the pieces clicking into place. Preserved, weaponized, used to frighten, to control, used to give the ghost a voice. He turned his gaze from the dome back to the wings. Where is Milo? He was at the stage door, you told him. He is not there, Aris said. He has not been there for some time. Aris left her on the stage, a single, frightened figure in the ghost light's lonely circle. He walked back into the backstage labyrinth, his footsteps sure, his purpose clear. He was no longer following a ghost. He was hunting a man. He descended the narrow stairs to the substage level. He navigated the maze of prop rooms. He did not go to the archive. He went to the small, cramped office tucked directly beneath the stage, a room he had bypassed earlier. The door was closed. A thin line of yellow light glowed from beneath it. He did not knock. He turned the handle. It was unlocked. He pushed the door open. The room was a cramped, dusty box, smelling of stale whiskey, old paper, and pipe tobacco. It was lined floor to ceiling with yellowed cue sheets, diagrams, and shelves of logbooks. Milo was sitting at a small, battered desk. a single green-shaded lamp illuminating his crumpled, ancient face. He was not looking at the door. He was staring at a framed photograph in his hands. He did not seem surprised to see Aris. He seemed resigned. She had a voice like spun glass, Milo whispered, his gaze fixed on the photograph. It could break you. Aris stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The small room felt like a trap. You lied, Milo, Aris said, his voice soft. You've been lying for 50 years. Milo slowly, reverently placed the photograph on the desk. It was Ilara in her blue gown, smiling. I didn't lie, the old man said, his voice a dry rasp. I protected her. I'm still protecting her. You were in her dressing room, Aris stated. The footprints that stopped, they were yours. You used the passage. Milo looked up, his pale, watery eyes filled with a half-century of grief. She showed it to me. Her escape, she called it. She felt trapped. The patrons, by the director, by him, the patron, the man who owned this theater, Augustus Kane, he bought her, he gave her jewels, he wanted to own her, she despised him. The air in the tiny office felt thick, suffocating. The sandbag, Milo, Aris said. You were on the fly rail, you knew the rigging, you let it fall. A warning, Milo cried, his voice cracking. He half rose from his chair, his hands gripping the desk. That girl, Isla. She was too close, she sounded too much like her. I couldn't let it happen again. I just wanted to frighten her, to make them stop, to let Ilara rest. And Marco, Aris's voice was cold iron. Did you kill him to let Ilara rest? Milo collapsed back into his chair, a sudden, terrible deflation. No, not Marco, I wouldn't. He was a fool, but he was harmless. A magpie like Serafina said. He found the star, but that's not all he found. What else, Milo? What did he find? He was in the dressing room. He was borrowing old fabrics, scraps for his own projects. He was always touching things. He was looking at her dress. The blue one. Aris felt a sudden, cold clarity. Isla had said her new dress was torn at the seam. Go on, Milo. Marco. He felt the seam of the old dress, the blue one on the mannequin. He found something, hidden, sewn into the lining of the bodice. He cut it out. He showed it to me this morning. He thought it was a clue to a treasure. He thought Ilara had hidden her jewels. What was it, Milo? I don't know, A piece of paper, folded, old. He was going to sell it. He was trying to find Serafina's collector. He thought he would be rich. The motive for Marco's murder, not the star, the paper. And the song, Aris asked, his voice low. The recording, Milo's face crumpled. It was hers, a private recording made on a wax cylinder, a gift to me. I played it to make them afraid. I wired it to the old announcement system, to the dome, a trick my grandfather, he taught me, acoustics, a simple mechanism. He was confessing to the sandbag, to the song, to the psychological terror, but not to the murder. You've been protecting her, Aris said, his gaze softening, but you haven't been protecting her secret. He walked out of the office, Milo following him, a broken, shuffling shadow. They ascended the stairs, back to the main level, back to the dim, cold corridor. Aris stopped at the door to dressing room 7. He took the master key. He unlocked the rusted padlock. He pushed the door open. The room was just as it had been, a shrine, a tomb of dust. Aris walked to the corner, to the wooden form, to the spectral blue silk gown. He ran his hand along the bodice, along the seam that Marco had investigated. His fingers found it, a small, uneven bump. No, not a bump, a repair. Marco had not taken the paper. He had been interrupted. He had, in his fumbling, clumsy way, sewn it back in badly. Aris took a small penknife from his pocket. Milo made a small, choked sound. No, please, let her be. Aris ignored him. He carefully, precisely cut the old, brittle threads. He reached into the lining. His fingers closed on a small, hard, folded square. He pulled it out. It was not a letter. It was a small, folded piece of stiff card. He unfolded it. It was a luggage claim ticket, old, faded, from the city's central station, and stapled to it was a small brass key, the key to a locker, a key that had been hidden for 50 years. Chapter 6: The Confession in the Walls. The small, hard key felt cold in Detective Aris Thorne's palm. It was a tangible link, a piece of a puzzle 50 years old, a piece that pointed out of the theater's closed loop of echoes and reflections. Milo was watching him, his face a mask of exhausted grief. He had confessed to the haunting, to the sandbag, to the song. He was a man holding onto the edges of a secret, but the center had been torn out by Marco. I will, Go to my office, Milo whispered, his energy gone, his shoulders slumped under the weight of decades. I will wait for you. You will, Aris said, his voice quiet, and you will lock the door, and you will not leave it. I will be back. The police will be here soon. They will want to talk to you about the sandbag, about everything. Milo nodded, a slow, shuffling, broken movement. He turned and disappeared into the backstage gloom, his footsteps the sound of a man walking to his own, long-overdue cage. Aris did not follow. He turned from the dust and decay of dressing room 7, the blue dress a spectral shadow in the corner, and walked. He moved through the wings, past the ghost light, its lonely circle seeming smaller now, and out the heavy stage door. The November fog had thickened, swallowing the city. It was, he noted, past midnight. The city was asleep, or trying to. The fog muffled all sound, creating a silence almost as profound as the theater's, but colder, wetter. He walked the empty streets. The clack of his own heels on the damp cobblestones was the only sound. It was a rhythm of thought, of assembly. Ilara Rauso. She was planning to flee, the secret passage, the luggage ticket, the key. She was not vanishing, she was escaping. She was escaping Augustus Kane, the patron, the man Milo named. Marco, the costumer, had found this key and the claimed ticket. He thought it was a treasure. He had told people, he had told Milo, he had tried to tell Serafina, and for that, he was killed. He reached the city's Grand Central Station. At this hour, it was a cathedral of emptiness. The great vaulted ceiling was lost in shadows, the massive clock face glowing a dim, ochreous yellow. A single, distant train hissed steam, waiting for a dawn that was still hours away. He found the luggage office. It was closed. He found a night porter, a man asleep on a bench, and showed him his badge. The man, old and annoyed, grumbled. Locker's eye, but that ticket, Aris held up the 50-year-old card. That's from the old wing, the West Depository. Ain't no one used that in 30 years. It's just storage now. The porter led him, his lantern casting swaying, distorted shadows, through a barred gate and into a part of the station the public never saw. It smelled of cold iron, diesel, and time. The West Depository was a cavern filled with rows upon rows of metal lockers, all filmed with a thick, gritty dust. The key was brass. The lock was brass. He found the number. 14B. He slid the key in. The metal was cold. He turned. With a groan of metal, a sound that had not been heard in half a century, the locked tumblers fell. The small metal door swung open. It was not empty. A single small leather suitcase sat inside. Aris pulled it out. The leather was stiff, cold, the handle dry and cracked. He laid it on a dusty bench under a single bare, fly-specked bulb. The porter watched, his curiosity finally piqued. Aris undid the brass latches. They snapped open, loud as gunshots in the vast, quiet hall. He lifted the lid. It was not jewels. It was not money. It was a life packed in haste. A simple wool traveling suit, gray and modest. A pair of sturdy walking shoes, a small theatrical box of makeup, and a dark-colored wig. And on top, a small leather-bound book, a diary. Aris sat on the bench. The porter respectfully stepped back into the shadows. He opened the book. The pages were brittle, the ink faded to pale lavender. It was a hand. Ilara Rauso. He read of her talent, he read of her triumphs, he read of her fear, he read of Augustus Kane. He owns me, she had written. He says my voice belongs to the theater and the theater belongs to him. He frightens me, his eyes, he says if I ever leave him, he will silence me forever. He read of her plan, he read of her love. Leon, she had written, my beautiful, kind Leon, he is a craftsman, he sees the truth of things, he doesn't see La Fantasma, he sees Ilara, he has prepared the way, the passage, Milo, that sweet, devoted boy, he will help Leon, he will be waiting, he will be at the station, we will take the midnight train, we will be free. Leon, Serafina's grandfather. The story was true. Aris read the final entry. It was dated the day she vanished. Tonight, after the aria, I will sing it. For the last time, I will go to my room, I will take nothing, I will walk into the wall, and I will be reborn. Goodbye, La Fantasma, goodbye, Augustus, my love, my Leon, I am coming. Aris closed the diary. The suitcase was her new life. The key was her escape, but she had never come to claim it. Her lover, Leon, had waited on this very platform. He had waited, and she had never arrived. He had returned to the theater, desolate, and found it empty. He had descended into madness, believing she had abandoned him, but she hadn't. She had been intercepted, she had walked into the wall, and she had never, ever walked out. Augustus Kane, the patron, the man Milo had named, he must have known about the passage. He had waited for her not in the audience, but in the dark, and Milo, the boy, had found her, or had been forced to help. This changed everything. Aris stood up, the suitcase in his hand. He knew with a sudden, cold certainty where Ilara Rouse was, and he knew with that same cold logic that Marco had not been killed for a key. He had been killed for this, for the diary, for the story. He had been killed to protect a secret far darker and more tragic than Milo's grief. He had been killed to protect the reputation of a man long dead, but whose legacy, whose name? Still echoed in the city, Augustus Kane. The question now was, who was the protector? He left the station, the suitcase a heavy weight in his hand, a tangible ghost. The fog was thinning, surrendering to the first cold grey light of dawn. The city was a watercolor of charcoal and slate. When Aris returned to the Lyceum, the building looked less like a sleeping giant and more like a corpse. Police cars were parked silently at the curb, their lights off. An officer at the door, a man Aris knew, nodded at him, his face grim. "Detective, you should come, we found him." The old man, Milo, Aris's blood ran cold, found him in his office. He took his own life, sir. Hanged himself with a stage rope, left a note. Aris entered the theater. The silence was absolute, the ghost light was off. The stage was lit now by the cold, sterile working lights of the police. He walked to Milo's office. The old man was gone. A single sheet of paper sat on the desk, weighted down by the framed photograph of Ilara. The note was a confession. "I did it. I cut the rope. I killed Marco. He found her secret. He was going to tell. He was laughing. I had to protect her. I couldn't let him dig her up. I have failed. She is not at rest. Forgive me, my queen." It was a perfect, neat, and tragic end. A confession, a suicide. The case was closed. Aris stood, the note in his hand. He looked at the photograph of Ilara. He looked at the suitcase he was still holding. The confession was a lie. Milo had killed himself, yes, a final act of devotion. But he was not a murderer. He was a guardian. He was a scapegoat. He was protecting the real killer. He was protecting the last person on Earth who shared his secret. Milo would never, Aris knew, refer to Ilara's diary as a secret he needed to protect from being told. Would have wanted her story told. He hated Augustus Kane, but he loved Leon. Aris's gaze lifted from the note, and he looked out through the small, grimy office window across the substage gloom. Serafina, the granddaughter of Leon, the heiress to the family's ruin, the one who believed her grandfather had been betrayed by Ilara. What if Marco had shown her the diary? What if she had been the first to read it? What if she had learned that the woman she hated had actually loved her grandfather, that her family's tragedy was not Ilara's fault, but Augustus Kane's? That would not lead to murder, unless… Aris looked at the note again. He was laughing. Marco, the fool, had found the key. He had found the diary. He didn't just tell Serafina, he told the one person who had the most to lose. The heir of Augustus Kane, the director, Julian Vance. Vance, who was using his family's money to restore the theater, to restore his grandfather's legacy. The confession, Aris realized, wasn't a confession at all. It was Milo's final act of stage management. It was misdirection. Milo was protecting Serafina. He had taken the blame for the murder she committed. But why? Aris looked at the diary, at the name Leon. He looked at Milo's grieving, loyal face in his mind's eye. The pieces slotted into place with a terrible, cold precision. Milo hadn't just loved Ilara from afar. He and Leon, they were rivals, both craftsmen, both in love with the same woman, but Ilara had chosen Leon. Milo, in his grief, had become her guardian, and in her death he had become the guardian of her secret, and the guardian of her lover's granddaughter, Serafina. Marco had found the diary. He had shown it to Serafina. She, in a rage of grief and misplaced vengeance, had confronted him, or perhaps, no, Milo's note. He was laughing. Marco, the fool, had tried to blackmail Julian Vance, the descendant of Augustus Kane, and Vance had silenced him. Milo, finding Marco's body, had assumed Serafina had done it to protect her grandfather's memory. And Milo, in his final act of unrequited love, had confessed to a murder he didn't commit, to save the granddaughter of the man Ilara had chosen over him. Chapter 7: The Final Bow. Detective Aris Thorne stood in the small, cramped office, the false confession in one hand and the real, tragic diary in the other. The smell of pipe tobacco and Milo's despair hung heavy in the air. The old man's final act was one of profound, misguided love. He had seen the world through the lens of a 50-year-old tragedy, and in his grief, he had misidentified the villain. Milo had died to protect Serafina, believing she had murdered Marco to protect her grandfather's memory. But Aris knew the truth was colder and far more practical. Marco, the magpie, had found the diary. He wouldn't have gone to Serafina. She had no money, no power. A blackmailer seeks a target who has everything to lose. Aris folded the note and placed it in his pocket. He left the office, the police photographer's flash gun popping in the corridor, a silent, sterile lightning. He walked back to the main stage. The working lights, harsh and white, banished the theater's romantic shadows, revealing the grime, the water stains, and the raw, unglamorous mechanics of the place. The haunting was over. The mundane, brutal reality had taken its place. He found Julian Vance near the orchestra pit, speaking in low, urgent tones to a uniformed police captain. Vance looked pale, shaken, but in control, the very picture of a director whose production had been derailed by tragedy. He was managing the scene just as he had managed everything. "It's a catastrophe, Captain," Vance was saying, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. Milo, poor mad Milo, to think he was capable of this, and now this. He must have been haunted by it for decades. "It seems so, sir," the captain agreed, scribbling in a notepad. "His note is a full confession, a sad end, but it wraps things up." "Does it?" Aris Thorne's voice, though quiet, cut through the exchange. Vance and the captain turned. Aris walked toward them, not in a hurry. His footsteps were the only sound, a slow, methodical pace on the dusty stage. He stopped 10 feet away. "Detective." "You're still here," Vance said, a flicker of something, not fear but annoyance, in his eyes. "The case is, it's over, isn't it?" Milo confessed. "He did," Aris said. "He confessed to killing Marco, but his timing is off. Milo was with me on the fly rail or in my sight for most of the evening. He was an old man. Marco was killed with a single, precise, powerful blow, a blow of anger, a blow of silencing." Aris held up the small leather suitcase he had retrieved from the station. "This," he said, "belonged to Ilara Rauso." Vance's practiced calm did not waver, but his focus became absolute. "What is it?" "Her escape, Mr. Vance. Her plan, she was leaving not just the theater, she was leaving him." Aris did not need to say the name. "She was running away with Leon, Serafina's grandfather. This diary, it tells the whole story, her story." Aris saw the small muscle in Vance's jaw tighten. "Marco found this," Aris continued, his voice a low, hypnotic monotone. "He found the key sewn into her dress. He didn't understand what it was. He thought it was a treasure map. But when he opened it, he found something better. He found your family's dirty linen." He took the small, lavender-inked diary from his pocket. "He didn't go to Serafina. He came to you, Mr. Vance, the grandson of Augustus Kane, the man who is pouring his inheritance into restoring this monument, this tomb. He came to you and he laughed, didn't he? Just as Milo's note said. He laughed and he named his price. The price to keep the secret that your sainted grandfather didn't just lose his soprano. He was the reason she vanished." Vance was very still. He looked for a moment like a plaster statue from the prop room. "This is absurd," Vance said, his voice strained. "My grandfather was a patron of the arts. He made Ilara Rauso. And so he believed he could unmake her," Aris said. "He was a man who owned things, and when she tried to leave, he intercepted her in the passage, the one he, as the theater's owner, undoubtedly knew about." "This is conjecture," Vance hissed. "It was," Aris agreed. "Until Marco, he brought you this diary. He threatened to go to the press, to ruin the grand reopening, to tarnish the name of Kane forever. You met him in his workshop, he showed you the diary, and while he was gloating, you picked up his shears, or perhaps an awl, and you plunged it into his chest. A single, clean, efficient blow." Aris took a step closer. The police captain was watching, his hand now resting on his notebook, unmoving. "You are a very good director, Mr. Vance. You staged this all beautifully. You let Serafina play the part of the petty rival, with her hidden roses and footsteps. You let Milo play the part of the devoted, mad guardian, with his sound effects and his falling sandbags. You let them create the ghost, a ghost that provided the perfect cover for a simple human murder." He paused. "But you made one mistake. Milo, he was truly devoted. He saw Serafina in the corridor, near Marco's room, terrified. She found the body, didn't she? And Milo, in his grief, assumed she had done it. He assumed she had killed Marco for her grandfather's honor, and he did what he had always done. He protected the tragedy. He wrote that confession, Mr. Vance, to save her. He died believing he was saving the woman Alara loved, her lover's granddaughter. He died to protect your killer. Aris looked at Vance. The irony, it's almost theatrical. Vance's composure finally broke. It was not a grand collapse. It was a simple, quiet exhale. The energy left him. The proud director became in an instant a small, tired man. He was a fool, Vance whispered, his voice dry. Marco, he was spitting on my family's name, on this house. This was all for her, to bring her music back. You mean to protect your grandfather? Aris corrected. It was the same thing, Vance snapped, his voice echoing in the vast space. The legacy, the theater, it was all one. I did what was necessary to protect art. The captain stepped forward, his hand now on his nightstick. Mr. Vance, I think you'd better come with us. Aris watched them lead the director from the stage, the last player. He turned, the diary heavy in his hand. He was alone. The theater was, for the first time, truly quiet. No songs, no footsteps, no whispers. He walked back to dressing room 7. The police had not yet sealed it. He stood in the doorway looking at the hidden panel. She walked into the wall and she never came out. He opened the panel. He stepped inside, his pocket torch cutting the darkness. He walked down the tight, spiral stairs, his footsteps the only sound. He came to the circular cistern, the dark, oily water, the looming, rusted machinery. He shone his torch onto the surface. The footprints had stopped at the edge. He looked closer at the base of the wall where the weeping stone met the water. He saw it. A small, dark blue fragment of silk, snagged on a rusted piece of metal just below the water line. The color of the aria of sorrows. Augustus Kane had been waiting here in the dark. He had met her in this passage. He had argued, he had threatened, and when she would not be owned, he had silenced her. He had pushed her into the deep, cold water of the cistern, her beautiful blue gown dragging her down, her grave, hidden for 50 years, directly beneath the room where her ghost was said to sing. Aris Thorne stood in the dark, in the cold, damp air, the blood on the dagger, the song in the hall, the shadow in the box. They were all echoes, echoes of a rage from a jealous rival, echoes of grief from a devoted stagehand, echoes of fear from a desperate killer. But the ghost, the real ghost, was just a girl in a blue dress who wanted to catch a midnight train. He turned off his torch, plunging the tomb into absolute blackness. He ascended the stairs, his footsteps slow, heavy. He emerged into the dressing room and pulled the panel shut, the click of the latch sounding like a final, closing lock. He walked out of the Lyceum, into the clean, cold morning air, leaving the theater to its silence. The song was over. The house, at last, was dark.